Programming can sometimes feel like you're just wrestling with chaos. But what if I told you there's a simple, really elegant idea that can bring a sense of order to all of that? Today, we're going to look at one of the most fundamental concepts in all of coding, but we'll do it by looking at something you see every day. So let's just start with this one question. What in the world does a vending machine have in common with the code that's running your favorite app? I know it sounds a little weird, but stick with me here because the answer reveals this surprisingly powerful idea that brings a real sense of calm and order to your code. And that brings us to our first big idea, what we're going to call the code vending machine. We're going to use this simple analogy to unpack a concept that is absolutely essential if you want to write code smarter, not harder. Okay, so here it is. At its very core, a function in your code is just like a vending machine. Think about it. It's this self-contained box. You don't need to know about all the gears and wires and cooling systems on the inside. All you need to know is what it does. It's designed to do one specific, reliable job. So you might be wondering, why do we even need these little black boxes in our code anyway? Why not just write everything out line by line? Well, that question gets to the very heart of why functions are so important for writing smarter, not harder. See, as you start building pretty much anything, a familiar problem shows up. As the source material puts it, your code can quickly become unwieldy. Imagine you have to calculate sales tax in 10 different places in your app. What do? You probably copy and paste the same 5 lines of code over and over again. It gets messy, it's hard to read, and hey, if that tax rate ever changes, you've got to hunt down all 10 of those spots to update it. And that's exactly where the function comes in to save the day. The definition is really simple. It's just a set of instructions that does one particular thing. But the magic part is this. You can pull out that section of repetitive code, wrap it up inside a function, give it a name you'll remember, and then you can just call that name whenever you need that job done. So really, what this all boils down to is a core principle in programming called don't repeat yourself, or DRY for short. Instead of this long, messy scroll of the same code copied everywhere, you write the logic just one time inside that function. Then you can use it anywhere you want. It just brings so much clarity to your work. Okay, so our function is a self-contained box. We've got that. But how do we actually use it? Well, this brings us to our next key idea, inputs and outputs. And just like with our vending machine, it really is all about the simple act of giving something and receiving something back. The comparison here is just perfect. With a vending machine, your input is a code, right? Like B4. In programming, we call those inputs parameters. The machine's output is, hopefully, a snack. A function's output is called a return value. It's that simple. It's a transaction. You give it some information, and the function gives you a result. Theory is one thing, but seeing this actually happen is where it all starts to click. So let's just walk through a really common everyday problem where a function is basically your best friend, cleaning up messy data. So imagine you're collecting names on a website form. And you know how people are. They might type in all caps or all lowercase or some totally random mix. So here we've got 3 messy names. We're going to pass all of them as inputs or parameters into a function we've created called fix_names. And boom, here's the magic. The function does its job behind the scenes. In this case, it's fixing the capitalization for each name. Then it gives you back one clean, perfectly formatted result. That's its output, its return value. The best part? You didn't have to write that cleanup code 3 different times. You just wrote it once inside the function. All right, now things get a little more interesting. Usually when you give data to a function, you're only giving it a copy. The original thing you passed in stays exactly the same. But what if you actually want the function to reach back and change the original data directly? Well, this idea is called passing by reference, and the source material has this really great metaphor for it. Imagine that instead of handing the function a copy of your data, you're attaching a piece of thread to the original data, and you hand the other end of that thread to the function. Now, the function can follow that thread right back to the source and change the original value itself. This whole idea of creating these little self-contained tools, it naturally leads us to one of the biggest, most satisfying benefits of using functions, creating code that you can reuse again and again and again. And this brings us right back to our vending machine. I mean, it serves thousands of different people, but its internal logic for getting you a snack is always the same. A function is exactly like that. You write the logic one time, and then you can call on it from anywhere in your program as many times as you need to without ever having to rewrite a single line. And this whole reusability thing isn't just about being tidy, it has real concrete benefits. I mean, it means you're typing less, which of course leads to fewer typos and bugs. Because the code is only defined once, it can actually make your programs load and run faster. And by accepting different inputs, a single function can handle all sorts of situations, which makes your code incredibly flexible. This all builds up to a really satisfying concept called modularity. Honestly, it's like working with Legos. Because your function is this self-contained block, you can completely change how it works on the inside. Maybe you found a better way to do something. And as long as the inputs and outputs stay the same, the rest of your program doesn't even know anything changed. It's the secret to keeping huge, complex programs from becoming a tangled mess. So how do you take all of this and actually put it into practice? Let's end with a simple, practical way for you to find and create your very first function. It really just comes down to these 3 simple steps. First, just start looking for repetition. The next time you find yourself about to copy and paste a few lines of code, just pause. Second, think of a clear name for what that little chunk of code does. Something like format username or calculate grand total. And finally, just wrap that repeated code inside its own function. That is it. Seriously, you don't have to overthink it. By just taking that one small step, you've already started to change that messy, chaotic code into something more organized, more powerful, and honestly, a lot more elegant. And ultimately, that's what this is really all about. Functions aren't just some technical tool. They're a way of thinking. They help us find the patterns in the chaos, to bring this quiet, satisfying order to the creative work of building things, and to turn all that complexity into simple clarity.